All right. Good afternoon and welcome to the House Progressive Caucus. It's Tuesday, May 6th, and today we are joined by members of the Progressive Party who have come from all over the state to visit the State House today. The topic of our public caucus today is going to be the Education Transformation Bill, an act relating to transforming Vermont's education governance, quality, and finance systems, H 454. We're going to be reviewing the most recent draft of the bill as it passed out of Senate Education. It's now been referred to Senate Finance, which will be, and then the final step on the Senate side will be Senate Appropriations, and then they'll vote on it on the Senate floor, and then they'll send that version back to the House. And we will not agree to pass the version that was sent to us by the Senate. So then a committee of conference will be formed. And then there will be 3 members of the House and 3 members of the Senate who serve on this committee on conference on Bill H 454. And they will negotiate over the differences. They can't introduce, at that point, they can't introduce any new ideas into the bill. They can just negotiate over the differences. And then once they come up with a committee of conference report, we can't make any further amendments to the bill. The committee of conference report is the negotiated bill. And then it's a strict up or down vote, yes or no. And we all vote on it. And then we decide, that's how we decide. And then it goes to the governor, and then he would either sign the bill, let it pass into law without his signature, or veto it. So we've got what feels like a lot of steps left on this bill. So I think it would be helpful to just kind of catch up with where the Senate is at right now. I wish I had a side-by-side for you so you could see the difference between what the House did and what the Senate did, but I can make sure that we're sending that information out by email when it's available, so people can keep up. But let's get started and introduce ourselves together. I'll get started. I'm Logan. I use she or they pronouns. I represent the Chittenden 16 district in Burlington. That is central and Old North End and downtown and part of the Pine Maple neighborhood. And I serve on Committee on Environment, and I'm the House Progressive Caucus leader.
I'm Bill Coleman from town of Newark in Caledonia County, and I'm active on with town committee and the county committee over there, which is it's an area where we don't have all that much activity, but we do have progressives out there who are interested in what's going on and continuing to organize our towns, and we hope for a lot more, but so far this particular time energy level is not what I'd like to see. So
Yeah, well, get people mad about the economy and we'll see how it goes. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Bill. Jackie Stanton, she, her. I live in Johnson, in Lemoyle County.
Linton Barnes, she, her. I'm in Waitsfield, Washington County.
I'm Doug Barnes, he, him. I live in Waitsfield.
I'm Lynn Eisenbray and I live in Burlington.
Ryan Chino from state representative from Chittenden 15, the East District and the Old North End, part of the Old North End, which is the part I'm in. And I'm on the House Healthcare Committee, and I have been for 9 years, and the House Ethics Panel. And I'm the assistant progressive leader right now.
Josh Ronsky, I'm the director of the Vermont Progressive Party and provide support for the House Progressive Caucus and Thailand.
Hi, I'm Will Anderson from Burlington.
Gabe Lajeunesse from Montpelier.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chloe Tomlinson. I use she, her pronouns. I represent Winooski, and I sit on the House Transportation Committee.
Kathy Ronsky, South Burlington.
Ed Ronsky, South Burlington.
John Boyer, I use he, him pronouns and from South Burlington.
Courtney Record, and I'm with the House Clerk's Office.
Right. Would it be helpful for you all, for me to screen share the bill as we're walking through it so you can see it up on the screen? I'd have to join the Zoom.
Yep.
Right?
Okay, they've also posted a breakdown side by side.
Oh, have they?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's do the side by side then. That's way easier to read.
Okay, I'll email it to you.
And I'll get logged into the Zoom.
It's in the Senate Finance like documents folder.
Yeah, for today. Sending a link to.
Thank you.
Side by side APPH and 7 amendment.
I think so, yeah. Well, that's what you were looking at?
Great Zoom. If I'm using the calendar event, since we're in room 270, do I need the room 270 Zoom meeting link?
I'll
try to log in.
One that, it should be the one that, oh yeah, there you are.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Okay. Success.
Sort of like a,
Decrypt.
yeah.
Yeah. Forgot to log out of my work account before I log.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay, so you should be able to. Okay, so let me know. You have trouble sharing.
Okay. I actually. Sorry, I thought I was muted. All right. I actually don't know if it's gonna be much easier to read this side by side than, but that's okay. We'll give it a shot.
This is what it feels like to be in legislative committees. Like when
Yeah.
there's a witness that they're figuring it out, you just like trying not to talk.
Do. Yeah.
Chips or something, you know, okay, we're waiting.
Okay. Almost there. But yeah, this is pretty much what it feels like to be a legislator. Lots of sitting, looking at documents, waiting for people to share things on Zoom.
Or the person next to you shopping on their computer, playing a video game.
There we go.
Okay, great. That's kind of hard to read.
Sports setting, yeah.
We might have to huddle around the screen a little bit.
Get brighter. Oh, I should the light. It might make it look a little more dramatic, stand out.
Yeah, we could turn the lights off close to the screen. But you'll see on the left, in the left column is the bill as passed by the House. In the right column is the bill as passed out of Senate Education.
Okay. It's still pretty bright in here.
Yeah. But you'll see the first section where they says here that they essentially they changed the intent of the bill quite a lot, you'll see. So here on the first page, they struck out all of this language here that is about the Brigham decision, US Supreme Court, Brown versus Board of Education, et cetera, et cetera. The education system's reeling from COVID, blah, blah, blah. And then the Senate replaced all of that language with the language here on the right-hand side, which just sets out the intent of the bill. And I'm sorry that I can't zoom in a little bit more. Let's see if I can. See if I can zoom in.
Well, this would be online right now, right? Or
Yeah. Yep. So you would certainly be able to find this document online and read it yourself. So over on the right-hand side, you'll see the language that the Senate replaced it with. I actually think this section is important, is to work strategically, intentionally, and thoughtfully to ensure that each change made to Vermont's public education system provides strength and support to its only constitutionally required governmental service. Ensure that each student is provided substantially equal educational opportunities that will prepare them to thrive in a 21st century world. So that's basically summarizing the Brigham decision. So anything we pass has to live up to that intent. If you felt, for example, that anything that we were implementing in our communities didn't live up to this standard, you could sue the state. So in the 2026 session, so this is what I was saying, we're not going to do everything this year. There are some really significant things we're not going to do this year, but in the 2026 session, they weren't able to talk about how to update career and technical education along with the general public education system. So next year, once we have our proposal for school district and supervisory union boundaries, governance, et cetera, then we'll go back, primarily our education committees will go back to the drawing board to think about how to integrate career and technical education in a way that makes it equally accessible to all Vermont students. And so we'll keep going here. Also next year, yeah, and I won't compare it too much to the House version, but I would recommend actually getting this document, reading this if you care a lot about this bill and want to make sure that we're doing what we need to do. They've changed some things here in this section. But in general, the overall kind of structure is somewhat similar. Some of the same, the House is saying we'll come back and make these decisions about career and tech ed, CTE, to make sure that it's accessible throughout the state. And then the final thing that we'll do next year is on page 4 here. The Senate Education Committee added these sections here to enact updates to special education funding to move from a census block grant formulation for special education funding to a pupil weight for special education within the foundation formula. So right now what's happening is that school districts are getting a block grant for their special education students. Now this is going to be built into the pupil weighting system, and then it will be reflected in the total amount per student that the school district receives to provide education. So that's another decision that's going to be made next year. So we'll want to pay close attention to what they're doing on special education next year as well. And they added some policy goals here for the foundation formula. So this was a little bit of the education committee telling the finance committee what they need to do. So transitioning to a foundation formula, the purpose of that is to be able to achieve scale and efficiency within our education system and provide equitable opportunity across the state. Right now, we have a lot of variation between school districts, how much is spent per pupil. And so the idea is that we're going to ensure that every student in Vermont is receiving substantively the same educational opportunity. Hey, David, welcome.
Thank you.
And so the goals that they're saying need to be included within the foundation formula in priority order are expansion of early childhood education, expansion of after-school and summer programs, especially in underserved communities, ensuring that every student benefits from arts, music, fine arts, languages, mental health services, providing enriched, extended college and career pathways beginning in middle school and being tracked through the end of high school and into college. Raising teacher salaries.
Senate added that.
Yeah. Yeah, the Senate Education Committee added that, which I think is funny because now it goes to finance.
That's a teacher, right? So that makes.
Yeah, well, and Keisha Ram Himsdale is in that committee and she's been actually good on this.
Finally.
Yeah. And then finally ensuring that the funding provided by different weights actually benefits the students that qualify for the weights. So this is one of the complaints that we've heard about the foundation formula is, okay, we're going to have this complex weighting system. You might find that a school district gets a higher per pupil, amount because of the presence of ELL students in that district and the presence of low income students in that district. But then they might just spend that on a nice gym or, whatever. More AP classes instead of making sure that it's benefiting students who need, English language instruction or et cetera. And then when you think about the fact that we're going to be adding special education funding into the foundation formula, then this makes this an even more important sentence. Because it does mean that once the special education funding is included in the foundation formula, that the school district needs to ensure that the funding for special education is spent on special education. So far, I like this intent section of the bill. Any questions, comments?
I don't like how narrow-sighted it is when it talks about the future. Like we're almost a quarter of the way through the 21st century and we're only going to prepare people for the 21st century. We should be thinking like beyond the 21st century.
I love that.
I'm not going to nitpick about that, but like when I saw that, I'm like, this just is like the classic problem is like people are thinking like 5 years ahead, 10 years ahead, 50 years ahead. We should be thinking more than that. Like it should prepare humanity it should prepare future generations to adapt to swiftly changing conditions on the earth. You know what I mean? Or something like that, but whatever.
Yeah. Or they could have just not said that kind of thing.
It's just weird. It feels like it's like anyway, whatever. It's messaging, governor's messaging.
Yeah, performative. Yeah. Okay. So this next section, this section on the Commission on the Future of Public Education, that's the commission that last year came out with the report that we're working from this year. That this amends the purpose of the Commission on the Future of Public Education. This is a huge difference between the House and Senate bill, actually. So in the House version of the bill, this commission is the commission that was going to come back next year with a few proposals for how to divide up our school districts around the state. And you'll see when we go on to the next page, there's a long list. Okay, the page after that. Instead, it's going to have a task force. They're going to have a task force with 8 legislators determine our school district boundaries. This is the Senate version. So in the House version, you'll see over here on the left-hand side, this is the list of people who would have been on the commission deciding the various proposals for how to draw our school district boundaries. It's a really long list. It starts here. So on the Senate version, 8 legislators, 4 senators appointed by the Committee on Committees for the Senate, and 4 legislators appointed by the Speaker of the House are going to make the proposals to the legislature next year about what our school districts are going to be. On the left-hand side, the House version, the list is legislators, Then we have school district boundary subcommittee that has a bunch of different people in it that includes like the NEA and the Superintendent's Association, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I also want to just flag in this section, I think it's coming up, yeah, it's right there, but it's actually the Senate proposal is not only, you know, highly politicizing the group of people and the discussions around school district boundaries. It's asking them to come up with, my understanding is a final plan to be enacted in less than a year from now. So
Yes.
the House is, just to be clear, it's, you know, a group of different, and, you know, folks who have expertise in the education field, who have been meeting for a long time already, who have a lot of credibility in the field. A few legislators, but not the majority or the entire group. And they're being charged per the House bill with coming up with 3 options that will go to the legislature. So this is one of the really big and very consequential differences between the Senate and the House.
And the timeline, the implementation
Very
timeline.
aggressive implementation. Like I don't really even, it's hard to even understand what that would look like. Does that mean schools are being reorganized and students changing schools mid-school year? It raises a ton of questions and concerns, and does not, to me, read to be student-centered.
Yeah, and what we've heard is that it was negotiated with the governor's office.
It also excludes that, you know, in addition to excluding the community's voice from that structure of government, it creates a vast inequity between the Senate and House. 1/30 approximately of the House will be on that, but 1/7 of the Senate. That's a big disparity. Like that means the Senate's gonna have a massively bigger voice in determining a plan that's going to go into effect. And then another thing, which is probably a typographical error, but I wouldn't put it past people if it isn't, is that they change community input into community unput. Does that mean that the community?
It's a Freudian.
I know, isn't that, it's just like, that, you know, they exclude community and then they change it into unput.
Little Freudian slip there. Oh, I can't wait to point that out to somebody.
Yeah, it's an adjective meaning not put.
So, yeah, we're gonna have the school district boundary task force. Again, this is the Senate proposal. Over on the right-hand side, you can see everything that they're supposed to pack in to their single recommendation to us next year. I think maybe they could have more than one proposal, but they're not required to have more than one proposal for us next year, whereas the House bill required at least 3. So these 8 legislators, I'm having a hard time with this. These 8 legislators are going to be the school district boundary task force. It's going to determine the most efficient number of school districts and supervisory unions, and propose boundary lines based on research, geographic and cultural landscape, historic attendance patterns, distribution of equalized grand list value per pupil, the provision of career and technical education, and a comprehensive analysis of school locations, facility conditions, student capacity, and transportation infrastructure. So they're going to do all of this, and the report is due in December.
I will note one positive thing that I'm appreciating is the acknowledgement that transportation is a really key issue in this discussion. And
in the House bill, that wasn't going to be discussed until next year.
Right. And that could really be a make or break. If we're talking about school consolidation, the costs of transportation are already high, could become astronomical, and we may not even have the work, like the companies and workforce to deliver on getting students to the schools they need to get to. So there's a lot of, there are still a lot of questions about costs in the House plan, and, you know, where is this, you know, are these trade-offs worth it or even realistic to accomplish? So
yeah, on the other hand, it's far less likely on the Senate version that there will be school consolidation. Because the House version included class size minimums.
To the point of transportation, not only might we not have a workforce, but my brother works in an oil refinery. We may not have fuel. They're preparing for a massive supply line disruption in the next year. And our state economists warned of a coming Great Depression that would be the same as in the 30s. If that happens, like, how are we going to get kids to school? If there's no fuel and no workers to bring them, we really do need to be thinking about that. And maybe even considering like what role does remote school play in the future if there is some kind of crisis like that, so that kids' education doesn't get disrupted.
Oh, that's a cheerful thought. But yeah, that's a good point. I mean, so anyhow, that was something that I think folks from rural districts in particular were really concerned about, was the class size minimums and the fact that that might force school consolidation. I can speak for folks from districts like mine, Burlington, where we have large class sizes. And in general are sending more property taxes out of our city than we're receiving back to our city for our education program. I know that in larger school districts, there's a lot of tension right now about the cost of rural education. So I think that's one of the political realities that we're facing in the State House right now is that there are many folks that would really, really like to see there be some sort of class size minimum. The governor's class size minimums were very large. They were certainly going to close schools, and they were going to do so in a year. And it was going to result in probably 50% of the staff in our schools being fired over the next year. And that was what was going to deliver the property tax savings that the governor promised at the beginning of the year. That is why we're doing all of this in the first place, supposedly. What initiated this was people's concern about their property tax rates. That's what we'd have to do to save money in the school system, is consolidate a lot of schools, have really large school districts, drastically reduce the amount of money that we're spending on administration, and fire about half of our staff across the state in order to reduce our property tax rates as much as Vermonters would like us to, without, changing our overall education opportunities available to youth, with the exception of the fact that then people would be, we'd have middle schoolers and high schoolers driving an hour and a half to 2 hours to get to school sometimes. That was the governor's proposal. Our proposal was higher class size minimums that would definitely have led to school closures. And it was unclear what the process was going to be to decide how those school closures were going to happen. There was a lot of argument about that on the House side. On the Senate side, they just tossed the class size minimums. Like, that's just gone. The other thing that we did on the House side, let's see. Over here, their boundary proposal has to include how school board representation models are going to be decided. So these 8 legislators are going to decide our governance model for our new school boards. They have to consider the possibility of doing a supervisory union rather than a school district. That's different from the House. Basically, they need to report on how we're going to save some money. I don't see us able to save a lot of money, actually, through this education transformation process that we're undertaking, frankly. I do think that it'll stabilize our education funding system once to move to the foundation formula. It'll provide more even access to education throughout the state. And then the consolidation of school districts will save some money on administration. Not much. And there will also be the cost of the transition itself. So it's going to take years before we realize the cost savings that will come from the reduction of administrative expenses. And what we've seen in other school districts that have consolidated is that spending didn't go down, because as soon as they reduced their administrative budget, they just reinvested that same amount of money into education. So quality of education went up in school district consolidation, but the cost of education did not go down. That's the trend that we've been seeing.
Can I ask you a question on it?
Yes.
You mentioned that foundation formula will achieve some sort of tax stability. Is that tax stability equally felt across the state and or across different classes of economic circumstance? In the way that the, well, very complicated system that's in place had, I think, potentially greater provisions to actually help particularly low income and working class people if the COLAs had been put in place for the income sensitivity.
So it hasn't gone through Senate Finance yet. So there's a House Finance proposal that would change the way that we do income sensitivity and property taxes so that, I don't even know if I
Yeah,
want
it may
to
not,
walk,
yeah,
like, that might
okay.
be gone by the end of the week. I have no idea. But
That's
essentially, yes, there's income sensitivity in the House proposal, but not substantive property tax reform, I would say. It made it a little bit easier to administer. And you know, if you earn less than X number of dollars a year, then the first $400,000 of your property value was not going to be taxed. It was going to be everything over that. If you make over X number of dollars, then the first $400,000 of your property was going to be assessed at X percentage, and then everything over that at a higher percentage, so forth. So
And does that 400,000 get indexed to COLA or does that stay?
I don't
know.
remember.
That
Yeah,
would be
I don't
a
remember.
factor.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I don't know that. Yeah, I don't know that inflation. I don't think that there was like a CPI index or anything like that in the House proposal, but I don't recall.
That's part of
actually.
what got us here with the current system, so that's why I was curious. Okay.
Well, I think most of what got us here with the current system is that healthcare costs a lot, frankly. And we have a lot of old school infrastructure. And
Right.
you know,
Absolutely.
like
But the-
we've
but
lost.
who pays has changed in 10 years without COLAs on the income sensitivity.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
I think that that's one of the things that they could have done was change that income sensitivity, and I didn't see the income sensitivity change a whole lot, frankly.
Okay.
Like,
Thank you.
it didn't, you know, the cutoff, I think it was still similar levels, like $50,000 a year household income. You know, got you like the low income homeowner.
Yeah.
Deduction. But again, we'll see what happens by the time it gets through the Senate. We could end up liking the way that the Senate handles this better than the way that the House handles it. We might feel differently about the way that the Senate education. I might like the work that House education did better.
Right.
And then end up liking the work that Senate Finance did better. And maybe, hopefully, that will get somewhere close to a combination of those things in the final bill that we pass after it goes through committee on conference. So this proposal also allows for the task force to create an alternative merger proposal. So if we, the legislature, next year fail to actually enact a plan to adopt new school district boundaries, then this plan will go into place, the alternative merger proposal. We don't know what that's going to look like because they have to provide the proposal for next year, but that's something to pay attention to. Well, we'll see how the final bill turns out. But there's going to be the need to pay attention to what's going on in the legislature next year, no matter what. There are a lot of decisions that are going to be made. And yes, and then finally, you'll see over here on the right, the report is due December 15th. So that is substantively what Senate Education has done here. There's a lot more detail. And they struck out a bunch of stuff that House Education had included in the bill. And the other notable thing is that the House version of the bill had created a lot of restrictions around independent schools that can receive tuition for
Mm.
public school students, and that was taken out.
Yeah. Wait,
Yeah, what a surprise, right? Yeah,
I get the impression that. And was influenced by the governor's folks, right?
yes.
Yeah, because I get the impression what he's trying to do is rush some radical, they call us radical all the time and say, but this is like really radical, like in a not cool way, radical, you know? Where, because that's also a term that's used positively, but like radical, like extreme change. But it feels like he's trying to rush it through by the election so that he can go back to the voters and be like, look what I did. But like, this feels really risky, like having a small group without solid community input, make like a generational decision about the governance of the school system and the financing in 2 years.
Yes.
It just feels really, like they talk about like our ideas as being risky and don't even listen. This is extremely risky.
It
At
is.
a moment in history where we need to be like sort of like careful because we just don't know what's gonna happen in the big picture, like
Yeah,
to just destabilize the school system. I don't know, I feel like this is really bad.
Good media quote.
yeah, it is.
Well, it's on.
Good thing
YouTube,
it's
so-
recorded.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask?
Yeah, no, actually, that pretty much sums it up. One last point here. I just wanted to point here. This is the difference basically between the two on independent schools. So, so we had a bunch of requirements for independent schools over here on the left side. You can see all of them. On the right-hand side, it just says that independent schools need to be compliant with the requirements of 16 VSA section 828. That's it. So yeah, we can stop there and then we have several minutes for questions and
Comments
or comments
Circumstances.
or requests about next steps. Go ahead.
So I was in public schools in New Mexico and Colorado. So I saw a lot of the same thing going on that you're going through. One thing that bothered me as an educator, when they basically, I want to know who's looking at homeschooling. Because a lot of the funding went towards supporting homeschooled families
Yeah.
to allow the students to come back into the school at the end of the day for athletics and music or theater. And so I want to understand if anybody is looking into funding that's going to be diverted to support these families.
Currently, as far as I know, there is no funding available for homeschooling families in Vermont. Yeah.
Careful.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's one of the things that we've been really guarding against. And I was very concerned at the outset about moving to a foundation formula because that is a similar trajectory you see to, you know, the privatization of the public school system. But as we've discussed it, when you look at the disparities of education across the state that we're seeing from school district to school district, and if the weights are structured well, then it's going to be better for students and will have some stability for funding. So it's going to be less of a fight on the individual school district level every year over the school budget. The decision will be made. This is how much we're spending on students. And everybody pays in and everybody's child gets substantively the same educational opportunity, but we're not headed the way of that kind of education funding model where you can just take the money that would have gone with your student home with you.
Well, it wasn't even all that because they also looked into Colorado, New Mexico, very similar to here with a lot of families that can't make it to these unified school locations. It would take them much more time. Transportation was horrible in many locations.
Yeah.
And so that's why a lot of the families pulled their kids out because they determined it would be much easier to keep them at home, educate them at home. But again, However, they were not always able, there are so many locations that don't have access to things going on to
Yeah.
get the kids involved with other kids their age. So it started to develop into
Yeah, I get it.
more.
Yeah,
So
especially if
that's
we
what
start
I
to consolidate schools.
watch for.
Yeah, if we see school closures, then that'll be, you're right. We should flag that and pay attention over the next couple of years. Any other thoughts? What's your general vibes on this change?
I have a question about so what you speak of as the bill that will finance the schools encompass what I know of as 504 and IEP and is that Title I or
So.
like, how does that?
So that is going to be built into our foundation formula. And that won't be done until next year. That's one of the things that I was talking about, is that it hasn't been included in the pupil weights yet, how much will be allocated, because on top of the federal funding that the state receives, we then add on to that, for schools. So, that's one of the conversations that we'll be having next year. And I think it's actually a good idea to have that conversation next year, because who knows what's going to happen with the Agency of Education this year? Nobody knows. I was just at the Agency of the Department of Education. Who knows what's going to happen with the Department of Education, federal US. I was at the Agency of Education, Vermont, yesterday, having a meeting, and everybody I talked with their positions were federally funded.
Wow.
And they were like, yeah, we may not have a job here by the end of the year. Almost certainly, they're like, we just don't know what's going to happen. It could end up that they will have jobs because the state will just get a block grant to provide all those services, and then get to make those decisions at the state level about staffing and programming and things like that. I don't know. It's really hard to know. It's a really hard time. So that's another reason why making hasty decisions and trying to implement something quickly, by the end of like next year in 2026 seems completely bananas to me. But that's what Republicans want. They wanted us to pass a bill that would be implemented this year. That's what they kept saying. But then when you would speak to those individual Republicans, you would find out that most of them, their kids went to private school. So they had no skin in the game, in like my experience.
Where does the voucher discussion fall?
Well, so that was one of the things that we're worried about with going to a foundation formula, is that then that could lead to the voucherification. They just don't, like, there aren't the votes in the legislature right now to allow that to happen. So we'll continue to have tuitioning for areas where there's no high school accessible to students within some range, I imagine, for independent schools, but we're not going to be allowing anybody to have a voucher, or everybody to have a voucher. That won't happen. There aren't the votes. I can't promise what'll happen in next year's election, though. Governor Scott's doing a very effective job, I feel like, of influencing the way that people feel about what we're doing. It's really hard to break through that right now. And I think based on the bill that we're about to pass, he's going to be able to say, well, Democrats aren't actually going to save you any money on education system, and Democrats aren't willing to make the change right away that we wanted, that you said that we need to make, and Democrats aren't willing to do this, and Democrats aren't willing to do that. And this entire legislative session, in my opinion, is just one long campaign to try to flip the House and Senate next year. And so we have a job to do. Thankfully, we're not Democrats. So we can say whatever we want. And I think it's a really good opportunity for progressives to be very vocal in our communities about what's happening, and be very clear about where Governor Scott is falling down on the job, because we don't have to be diplomatic. we don't have the sort of like political calculus in the state house that the Democratic Party has right now. They have to get something negotiated so we can get a budget signed and get an education bill passed and do all this kind of stuff. But this is an opportunity for us to speak plainly to folks. And I hope we can get the message out. So that's why I wanted to spend time kind of walking you through what's going on here. Brian.
Well, just speaking of diplomacy, for 8 years, I would meet with his staff and give them ideas, and they would, be polite and listen, and sometimes take one of my ideas and like weaken it dramatically and then implement it. But I feel like they've been fake all along and just playing with me, because I'm looking back, there were times where they encouraged me to do things that seemed stupid and I didn't, like to cause trouble. Like they'd be like, why don't you take this idea you have and try to attach it to this bill? And I'm like, but that's just gonna piss off the Democrats. They'd be like, yeah. And I just feel like they've been manipulative, and that the governor's really good at like smiling and nodding and putting on this like facade of politeness, but he's actually been pretty hostile in terms of his actions towards the working people and most vulnerable people in Vermont for 8 years. And that I think right now he smells blood and he's going hard, and he's using Trump as a cover for but he's doing a lot of the same things that Trump is doing, like using his executive power in unconstitutional ways, and using impoundment, like finding ways to withhold spending on appropriations that the legislature approved. For example, what he's doing with the motel program. So I just think there's so much danger in him getting reelected with a Republican-led Senate or House or both.
Yeah.
Like it would really be bad. So I just think it's important that people go back to our communities, and when we hear people say he's nice, that
We say
the
no.
progressives are prepared, with like, and I have a few of these talking points, but there might be a benefit to the party assembling a list of like everything evil that Phil Scott has done and making sure that it gets out there over the next year.
Yeah.
Because the Democrats are really afraid of that kind of conflict, and I don't get it.
Because half of them vote for Phil Scott.
Yeah.
I haven't ever voted for Phil Scott. I
never would, even for president at this point.
Okay, I've got to run back over to the State House. I hope that was helpful and interesting.
Thank you very much.
Oh, good. I'm glad that was interesting for you. And more information will go out if you want to come to Burlington and learn even more about the education bill this weekend, but otherwise it's going to be recorded by CCTV. So it'll be available to watch it another time. And feel free to email us anytime with questions.